Now my goal here is to add a filter area on this all events page above that list of events, where we can select a year and a month in drop-down menus. And when we selected a combination and clicked on Find Events, we change the URL and we go to this filter URL, to this Slack page here. And on that page, we then read the filter values from the URL to pick the correct events. Sounds cryptic? Well, let's implement it together step by step. And the first step for that is to add a little filter box, a search box above that list of events on the All Events page. Now for this, I'll add a new component in this events folder, and I'll name it events-search.js. Now this will hold a functional component, the events search component, which receives props and which we, as always, export, of course, like this. And then in here, we'll have a couple of things which we need to do. First of all, I'll start with the JSX code that should be returned. Here, I want to return a form because we'll have a couple of inputs, and those inputs can take different values, and ultimately they are submitted. So we have a form. And in that form, I have a div with another div inside with a label inside where I say year. And this label will then be for a select element, so for a drop-down, which allows us to select a year. Therefore, I'll give this label the HTML4 attribute and set this to year, and give this the ID attribute and set it to year, so that we have this connection for accessibility reasons. Now in this select input here, for the year I want to present two options, 2021 and 2022. Of course you can pick any years here, though I picked these years because I have dummy data for those years here in my dummy data array. So these are my two options. I'll then give these options a value key each, which is the internal identifier, which I'll get access to later. And I'll set this to 21 and 22 as well, like this. So that's now the first dropdown. Now next to this div, so to this div here, which holds that first dropdown, I'll add another div with a second dropdown for the month. So here we'll have a label for the month, and hence I'll set the HTML4 attribute to month. And then below that, I'll add another select element. And looks like I accidentally deleted a div here, so let me re-add it. So then here I have another dropdown, and this will get an ID of month, like this. And then we need to add the options. And here we'll have 12 options because we have 12 months. So I'll start with January and set the internal value here to 1. And then replicate this a couple of times so that here we also have February and set this to 2. Here we have 3 and March, and well, you can probably guess what comes thereafter. April and May, and 4 and 5, and then 6 and June, and so on. So I'll quickly complete this list here. July. And then also here we have August. And then we also need September and October and November and December. And then also update those numbers so that here we have 9 and 10 and 11, 11 and 12. So now these are the options for the second drop down here. And now below that, below all the divs, but inside of the form, I'll then also add my button again. So my button component, and therefore, of course, we need to import that. At the top, we want to import button from going up one level, diving into UI, and then the button file. So that here we then have this button component, and on the button we can say find events. However, this button here shouldn't be a link. It should be a real button which submits the form of which it is part. And hence, we need to go back into this button component in the UI folder and tweak it a little bit. Because this button component should either render a link, as it currently does, or a normal button. And it should render a link if the link prop is set. If it is not set, it should render a normal button. So here I will simply check if props link is truthy, so if that is set, and if it is, I'll return my link as I did before. Otherwise, if we make it past this if check, we don't have a link, and then I'll return a regular button. A button where we output props.children, so where we still pass on the content passed between the tags, and where we then set the onClick prop to props onClick, so that we can use our own button just as the built-in button. I also want to add a class name here and set this to classes.button as well, so that we still apply those CSS classes. With that, we can go back to the event search component. And here we are now therefore done with this JSX code. Again, some styling would be nice, and therefore just as before, attached you'll find some styles for this component. So attached you'll find an events search.module.css file, which you should add next to the events search.js file. And then here we import classes from /events-search.module.css, and then add a couple of class names to this JSX code. To the form, for example, we add classes.form. To this first div, we then add classes.controls, and those divs only exist for the styling. That's why I have these nested divs. Then here I'll have another div with a class of control. So the outer div has controls, the inner div has control. And we don't need to add anything to the label and so on, but this div here, which holds the month, also receives classes.control like this. And with that, we're done though. That adds all the styling that needs to be added. At the moment, of course, this component is missing any logic, but it at least has the JSX code and the styling. So we can already include it in this index.js file in the events folder in the pages folder. So on this all events page. Here we can import events search from going up, components, events, and then there events search. And now above the event list here, I'll add events search like this. We can now also replace this div, by the way, with a fragment if we want to import it from React. That's not mandatory, but I'll do it here because we don't really need that extra div. Now if we save all files, we should have this filter area or this search area above our events. Now it's therefore time to add some logic.